A group of noble young ladies were frolicking in the pool. Suddenly, a body floated by, sending the group into a panic. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was Nabo, the queen's missing favorite. Upon hearing the news, the queen openly dressed in black and mourned Nabo's death. To her surprise, Louis was not angry. Instead, he sought out the queen and asked her to help host Prince Inaba from Africa. The queen, hearing this, immediately pushed Nabo aside and, secretly delighted, went to change clothes. In fact, the painting hanging in the queen's chamber clearly indicated her preference for black men. Bontan also noticed that the queen might have a crush on Inaba. He warned Louis that the queen had met Inaba before in Paris, but Louis was already aware of the queen's relationship with Inaba. He said Africa was a rich land, but unfortunately, it had closed its doors to France. To open this door, he needed the queen's help. The next day, Prince Inaba from Africa arrived in Versailles. Bontan took Inaba directly to the queen's chamber. As Inaba thought he was being imprisoned, the queen entered. After exchanging pleasantries, they both exchanged looks full of affection, but due to the guards at the door, they could only admire each other's figures by turning around in circles. As their desire for each other grew, Bontan entered and announced that Louis was ready to receive Prince Inaba. When Inaba saw Louis, he wanted to quickly settle the trade agreement between their countries, but Louis was in no rush. He took Inaba to the garden to show him the Versailles palace he was about to build. Inaba, however, wasn't interested in Versailles. He once again asked when the negotiations would start. Louis calmly replied that Inaba would experience French hospitality that evening. Meanwhile, Guel, stripped of his noble title, was walking in the pouring rain. His destination was to seek refuge with the most powerful noble in northern France, Cassel. Cassel had already heard of Guel's plight, and he was very displeased with the king's actions. When Guel arrived, Cassel handed him a musket. He planned to use force to stop Louis from building the Versailles palace. He believed that if Versailles couldn't be completed, Louis would have to return to Paris and be controlled by the nobles. Already harboring resentment against Louis, Guel eagerly accepted Cassel's offer. From then on, he began burning, killing, and looting along the road where gold and stones were being transported to Versailles. He even murdered the nobles who obeyed Louis and were headed to Versailles. Louis was furious upon hearing the news. Although he didn't know who dared to rob royal supplies, he knew that if he couldn't ensure smooth transportation, not only would the Versailles palace remain unfinished, but internal strife could break out. The ministers suggested moving the remaining nobles in Paris to Versailles. Only by doing so could Louis secure his rule. Louis asked which nobles dared to oppose him. The minister replied that Duke Cassel was the leader, with great influence in the northern and eastern regions. If Cassel was willing to move to Versailles, these problems would be easily resolved. Louis then ordered his portrait to be sent to Cassel as a show of authority. But to his surprise, Cassel threw Louis's portrait into the fire and sent Louis a letter in return. Meanwhile, the dinner to welcome Prince Inaba was about to begin.